Another possibility would be that she starts like to reflect about her daily, or about her career, or how, you know, how she goes during the day, to give herself the permission to have time for herself, for the joy department, for the fun department, yeah? Yeah. For the inner child, because relative to the South Node transit in the 4th house.
Laughing.
Right? Laughing and laughing.
Stories for children. Read out stories for children.
Yeah, for herself. For herself, to learn to nurture herself, to be her own mom. Yeah? To do body painting. Yeah? Or, you know, or whatever. You know? Just fun, something like fun things.
Let the children paint your body. Yes.
Yeah. To also make like relative, to give herself time for constant inner self-reflection. Yeah? To learn that she always shall ask herself, what is good for me right now? Like a loving parent always has an eye on the child. Yeah? To then be the supporter of herself. Therefore she needs time and to learn to nurture herself. By that she needs to reflect about her own very needs in every given moment. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? And if this need, you know, right now if she doesn't want to go for a swim, you know, we're still teaching, then inwardly, in our dialogue with her inner child. Yeah? Or senses, hey, I hear you. You know, we go like an element later. Mercury's the rule of what house? 11th? Yeah. 11th house? No. Oh, in 8th house. I know, my thought is already gone. It's still hot in here. Anyway. Are we clear in transits a little bit? Are you sure?
Well, because, again, a lot of the, you know, I know there was a lot of us that thought we could, like, go boom, boom, boom with a lot of different examples, and obviously we're able to see that we have to go back again to original intent and work from there.
Yeah.
So at least the things that you were saying recently about the transiting nodes, I think that we can then plug them into our own charts, because of so many of the, you know, there's a lot of similarities there.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at Uranus, looking at the sun,
yeah.
You know, those same qualities,
yeah.
and then plugging them into.
Right. And see, right now that North Node transits Leo, for all of us, the keyword in every reading is to help the client understand how to integrate what has been traumatized. Integration is Leo. To make it my own again, you know what I mean? Not to always, because of the threatening memories, to have it like outside of me, but to reintegrate it. Yeah? Another word is like allow yourself to be centered within yourself. Here, relative to what she needs in every given moment. Yeah? And to stand for that, to take the complete responsibility. No, right now I just damn want to be by myself. Yeah? To sense it. And then to go for that. Then she breaks the old pattern. Yeah? We could go fast through any given chart. Yeah? But here I think it was very helpful to slow down, to understand that when a Neptune is like on the 4th house cusp, we're dealing with healing. We first need to understand what needs to be healed. Otherwise, we make this goofy kind of statements, like a lot of astrologers. Neptune, spiritual. You know, the client has all these ideas about, has no idea what it is. Yeah? So to bring it a little bit down to reality.
You never touched on Mars.
I didn't even touch the Mars in transit. Oops. Well, what we see is that here right now, because Mars being transit 4 degrees or 3 degrees, applying to crossing the ascendant, that we see that she's right now relative to her own needs or subjective desires. That she's right now very isolating herself. She needs a lot of space, yeah, to act inwardly. Yeah, 12th house. I mean, compared with Gloria last segment in Pluto school, do you remember? She was on. Yeah? Gloria was rolling up and down. Yeah? Now she's like, almost like hushy gone, you know, There's time for being by herself, to inwardly confront herself, yeah, with a cycle that happened before, and to prepare via culmination and elimination, yeah, of kind of anger, yeah, stuck up anger that is there. That, of course this is anger. Yeah, yeah, and Mars is the ruler of your 6th house. Yeah, so we have health issues. Yeah, and the anger is linked to, you know, the emotional, displaced emotions of abusive childhood. The anger of sacrificing my own needs because mom is sad. Yeah? The anger of being not loved for what I am because I never can reach the, you know, this expectation level that the mom put on me. Making me the scapegoat for the family because they fucked up their decision to get married when they weren't in love with each other or when it wasn't right. Yeah? That's anger.
But also Uri.
Or even rage.
Rage, actually.
Her throat, when her sore throat is her swallowing that anger. It makes the throat sore.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why when I cough, it's coming from really, really inside.
So what we're doing here, you're being able to express that, someone that where you can express, even though God forbid it's taboo, with that Saturn there. Your resolution, your healing comes when you can dare to be able to express your anger.
Yeah, I actually know where this anger is coming from, and I need to deal with myself because of how it's implied. So I know this anger has to do with me repressing that anger and like shooting the arrows against myself. So I have accepted, and you know, I'm taking it out now. So yeah, it's cool, you know, to be aware at least of what's going on. Yeah.
Oh, and what Gloria just said has something to do with culmination. Yeah? Via the anger she's purging right now from a built-up, from emotional, you know, no? That's T-scoring her notes right now. So what does it have to do?
That's why I wanted to find out, because I'm driving back to San Francisco tomorrow, and
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow after lunch. No, tomorrow.
Is tomorrow the end of school now?
No. I have to go.
Oh.
Because of my own needs, I have to work tomorrow. So
what is the resolution note? Mars transiting T-square the notes. Traveling relative to your own needs. That's what you just said. Yeah?
Oh, you even use the resolution note for transit.
Sure.
Interesting.
In this moment. Then she decided, yeah, Scorpio, to go on a journey relative to her needs. In what kind of a city? What kind of a city is San Francisco? Earthquake City, South Node, Aquarius transiting her 4th house. Pardon me? We don't know. If so, then probably when Mars is on her ascendant.
there's going to be probably an earthquake back home sometime. we have a volcano, and Jeffrey talking about the thing. We have had this is an active volcano right on the city that's been active for ages. But since last year, there's been this panic that it's going to explode any moment. So we are in a sort of a state of yellow alert all the time. Quito. And it's, the volcano moves, it makes it moves, but it hasn't decided to really. So it might happen sometime.
Spell her so that we
It's Quito, Ecuador, Ecuador. You might hear it on the news, something else.
If you want to, you can turn off the camera. This is boring when we're done this. Perfect.
How about that for camera?
Okay, today go through Uranus and Neptune. Before we do that, I want to, because after this class is done, some of you will get ready to start doing homework, and I want to give you the procedure to do the relationship stuff. Now you have the procedure for the natals. So when you get ready to do the 2 relationship charts of your choice, number 1 thing is to make an overall analysis of each individual's chart so you get a firm understanding of each individual's reality. Then try to define and interpret the critical issues in relationship, the second, 12th, 11th routine, including Mars-Venus phase, and the sign of Mars-Venus. For those that want to get wild, Greg South knows the Mars and Venus and the evolutionary flow, the other north nodes. And then go ahead and do the synastry part via the methodologies that we've taught. And then the final step is decomposing. Now the last assignment you will do, you'll take one of these relationship charts and you'll transit and progress them to the day that you're making your analysis. So what I also decided to do is guard solar returns. So mainly because, to be blunt with you, they're essentially irrelevant. Everything you're going to know in time and space and where the soul's at any moment in time is really transits and progressions. It's sort of like solar return is irrelevant. I don't even use
You don't use them?
them. No. I'm forced to explain stories in the
You think that's more relevant?
I know it's more relevant. After all these years and 20,000 clients.
So it's nice that we can skip them.
Yes, it'll make it more simple for you, and you get the essence anyway, so why add another piece of stuff on that?
I'm glad about that.
Yeah, me too. Don't have to teach it anymore.
If you transit and progress each chart, not the composite.
You transit and progress each individual's chart.
Transits and progressions to the composite chart are legitimate too, aren't they?
Yes, but you'll see this through the synastry. And you'll also see it through composite. That's the final icing on the cake routine.
Do you make composite and synastry out of progress charts too? Do you make synastry charts or composite charts out of progress charts too? I mean,
Yes, you can do like, say two people are in a relationship, they both have their progressed thing. You can actually make a composite based on that progression. And you can see where the couple's at through progressed time.
and you can make a synastry out of progress charts too to see how they're relating that time too?
Exactly. Especially if you refer it back to natal synastry. It really becomes quite from that point of view. Clear on the instructions? So we'll just finish up then with Neptune and Uranus. Uranus, if we remember the original archetype, through transit simply means that all those archetypes linked with Uranus are active. The underlying impulse when Uranus is active is to whatever point it is aspecting, be it a planet, angle, or cusp. Those points receive now via transit the evolutionary impulse to liberate from some pre-existing condition which is serving to limit their development, or in some cases it's come to a standstill. It's like it being stopped in a certain area of life. Uranus comes along in order to utterly liberate the soul from wherever they're stuck. From this point of view, Uranus / individuated unconscious, or in Freudian terms, the subconscious, contains the larger blueprint for our future. reflected in the core evolutionary intent of Pluto and the axis. So when it's time to make significant change, Uranus comes along. And the way that Uranus is experienced initially in transit is that the soul/personality receives initially some messages that surface from right to left brain, messages that initially are not complete. They're the famous Uranian snapshot, partial picture, partial imagery, partial vision, all reflecting a diversity, in most cases a diversity of possible or potential new directions in their life to initiate, in such a way that those directions have the effect of changing/liberating whatever the existing reality is of the point being activated in the Uranian transit. Now, when these messages first percolate, it's like percolating into awareness. It's coming through Saturn's door. And you can see the direct implication, whatever the existing nature is of our reality, Saturn. The issue with Saturn, again, is that it creates the overall sense of security in our life relative to whatever our existing reality is, in total. There's an emotional investment implied. There's security already in place because of. And here comes Uranus trying to knock on that door. I mean, like, we could close this door. We could look inside of here, and we've got a structure, all of it that's in it. That's the Saturn reality. And believe me, if we all just sat here in this moment, extended in space, there's no growth. And Uranus every once in a while wants to come to the door and knock. And it's knocking in such a way as to change the existing reality. And it's no different than when someone comes to your door. You have the choice to open or not open. You know, especially if it's a Jehovah's Witness. Yeah. So, most of the time we want to keep that fucker closed. Kind of peering out to see when they go away. Well, that's the interaction of Uranus and Saturn in a nutshell. So, think about that on an image level.
That's why they usually wear wooden shoes.
Yeah. So in any case, what this means is that for many folks, based on the existing Saturnian structure reality, even though they can receive these inner impulses, which are disjointed, none of the thoughts being complete. It's not like A, B, C, D. For many, it can be very easy, Saturn, to repress those messages. When that becomes the case, then it creates a psychology deep within because of their repression, with an increasing existential angst, and kind of a very silent inner anxiety of despair, a free-floating anxiety that can't, when it's repressed, a person can't put their finger on. It's like a fundamental uneasiness, a fear that is generated that is undefined, and yet a fear that says somehow I feel like my life is going to be fundamentally disrupted. It's a free-floating fear. And again, for many, they repress it, the Saturn transit becomes non-active, and they stay exactly where they have been. For others, the awareness of possibilities, making this change, going in that direction, they do allow the awareness into consciousness, but it doesn't mean that they take action on it. It's held within as like in a state of suspension. And it's sort of like saying yes, but. Whereas the but stops it. For others that decide, well, okay, in some way I'm going to try to go with this, immediate confusion for most relative to the fact that typically a diversity of possibilities are revealed. Then therein lies the confusion, because these various possibilities are not well defined. They're not, again, A, B, C, D, partial picture. And this creates, in most people, because of Western conditioning, excessive analysis with respect to the different possibilities. And because they're not well thought out, all too often the individual ends up talking himself out of it, even though they've considered it. Because through excessive analysis, they manage to generate doubt. It's not practical. For others who decide to really go for it, then the way you work with them in a counseling scenario, or if it's your own reality, where your words are really straightforward, i.e., first, inwardly monitor the element of repetitiveness in the messages showing you a diversity of future. Is the element of that which is most repetitious, i.e., it's not going away, it keeps coming back, versus the ideas that show up once in a while, infrequently. There's that immediacy. No matter how radical Uranus, it may seem, from the point of view of one's Saturnian, i.e. existing reality, that will reflect the next 3 to 5 years of that person's life. What you tell them with respect to the ideas that are also continuing to surface, but not frequently, this information will either be delusion outright, and or information that would be applicable 5 to 8 years from now. And the next step, because this works without fail, if what you tell the client or yourself, if in fact the information that is becoming repetitious is correct, before the analytical mind strikes and tears it to pieces, before that, there'll be a very transitory, fleeting sense of psychological excitement, enthusiasm, or exhilaration. Then the analytical mind takes over. That's the way you're telling the client, if the information is correct, see if in fact there's this very quick Uranian sense of exhilaration, etc. If so, the next step is to inwardly validate Uranus to themselves, Uranus, that information is correct, and that they don't need to analyze anymore. They don't need to demand to know why. They simply now need to take action. As they begin to take action, the specificness of the action will then allow for an additional surfacing, Uranus, of additional information / the creation of external circumstance that will keep them going in the direction initiated. There's also a way, because typically in these scenarios, in this evolutionary impulse, Uranus / soul will attempt to eliminate or remove any conditions or people that are no longer relevant to that person's ongoing development. And the way that one experiences this psychologically and emotionally is a progressive sense of distancing, emotional distancing between themselves, a person, people, or a circumstance. What you need to tell these folks is that the challenge now is for you to interpret rightly why that distancing. Remembering all too often, because of the interaction with Saturn, that typically the person is made to feel guilty. Uh-oh, I'm feeling distance from my lover. I'm feeling distance from my best friend of 10 years. The issue here is that it's sort of like the analogy of a glass of water. And if the glass is full, I obviously get no more water in it. So in these sort of transitions, it's as if the soul is trying to empty the cup so it can be refilled with new people, dynamic circumstance to reflect where the individual is going. That's why the necessity of emptying. So this is what you need to tell these people. This is why the distancing is happening. And so in those scenarios, essentially, the person has one of two choices, either to significantly change the dynamics that are existing between themselves and the people that they are feeling distance from, and or, in certain cases, with elimination. So that's one application of the transit. Any questions on that application?
What do you mean changing the existing dynamics?
What's the confusion in those words? What do existing dynamics mean?
The word dynamics.
Right now we're all interacting, and the dynamics are going on between all of us. Have you been in a relationship? Have there not been dynamics between you and that person? Well, that means dynamics. And when you go through Uranian transit, it means to change them in order to grow. So any questions on this particular application? Now for another application of the transit. For individuals who have been repressing knowledge, either about themselves and or circumstances or people that they are currently involved with. Awareness is active, whatever has been repressed, even if that's unresolved trauma for themselves. Repression is taken off. And all of a sudden, all kinds of bizarre information begins to surface, bizarre thought, disjointed thought, scary thought, and all that, i.e. the very nature which has been repressed becomes revealed. This can also correlate with past life memories. And this, for some, can be extremely disabling, particularly when the nature of that which is surfacing contains the nature of repressed trauma. This can also reflect itself via relationship between two people, i.e. if there's been something that has been repressed for whatever reason, even truths which have been repressed, certain realities which have been misstated or denied. Well, suddenly the truth of will be revealed. For others, depending on their evolutionary awareness or development, it can be a time frame of truly evolving their brains, rapid formation of dendrites, all kinds of new connections, realizations, insights, an expansion of the brain, an expansion of the consciousness, expansion of awareness of levels of reality, like a lightning bolt. Sudden insight. The insight you've been waiting for 20 years, so to speak. Suddenly the Zen bolt breaks. It's like, boom. Sometimes that stuff is not pleasant. It's particularly when, at this level of evolution, when a person's really totally invested themselves in a particular philosophy or logical way of organizing phenomenal reality that they want to believe, the emotional investment, security therein, the rigid defense of for countless lifetimes perhaps. Suddenly Uranus becomes active and it's all blown apart. Like throwing a hand grenade into some structure and it's just wiped out. And when that happens, I mean, on the one hand, there's a kind of a bizarre happiness because the brain's growing, they've seen something else. But on the other hand, there's a kind of a weird grief and sorrow and also kind of depression that occurs because after all, something's been totally shattered, Uranus, that they have put so much time in investing into. That can also include the structures of one's life, by the way, that suddenly are shattered, apparently, out of the blue. The famous "I didn't see it coming." Question application. How many are going through active Uranian transits now? We all recognizing, are we?
I think like all three of them would flag.
Well, they can.
That's what's good when they interact. When you have some of this and some of that. How do you know what's going on?
What degree is it in Aquarius? Does anybody know?
1630 retrograde.
What is it stationary direct? Or where does it, anyone know?
Hey, Lois, would you give me a coffee? Thanks.
If you try, like, if you find yourself distancing yourself from people, like I find like a whole slew of people totally shocked, like, oh, I'm going to be friends forever and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so much forever is
I know, exactly.
throw this word away.
But since I've been with friends that have been like 3 and I've been to distance now, and there's some I just have let go because I just don't feel like any connection at all. But then there's some who I feel like I might be able to change stuff with, but what I find happening most of the time is I'm the one that goes actively after them to change it. And usually if I do that, they don't change it.
It's not what you meant to do. Thanks.
But I find that people who come to me,
That's right. Okay.
you let go, and some of the people, like, you feel distant from them and let them go, or you try to work things out and it doesn't, so you have to. How do you resolve, like, the trauma from, if you have unresolved stuff with them?
You don't. It waits till the next life.
Okay.
Another application of Uranus, which is a neat application. One of the archetypes that Saturn correlates to in consciousness, human psychology, it's called that which is latent and or dormant, and i.e. a capacity which is remaining to be unlocked. Direction that has been to be revealed. So sometimes when Uranus is active, it releases, meaning it becomes a time frame in which what that dormant or latent capacity has been becomes active. You can see why, following all this line of thinking, the word transformation is typically linked with Uranus. To take some existing structure and to transform it. The issue of invention, brilliance, genius, the radical discovery can also, of course, apply any Uranian transit. And it's really an interesting study, by the way, if you focus on birth charts of inventors, like, say, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, and you look at their charts and you see the archetype anyway, natally. And then you time it out when they've had their major discoveries. And you'll see in every instance that in one way or another the Uranian archetype had been ignited. It's just like clockwork. It's fascinating.
Do they usually have a very strong Uranus in their chart too?
Absolutely. Just like in my own, I've got Uranus on North Node, 8th house, aspects almost all things. And there you see it. See, on a physical level, if you go back to chakra system, you can see that the middle layer of the root chakra becomes activated. Because on a pure physiologic basis, Uranus is the electricity in your body. It's the overall vibration of your body, which reflects your current state of evolution. So when there's all of a sudden this time frame comes to real leaps in your evolution, which Uranus is for, it is changing the vibratory rate of your beingness. That's why when you're under a Uranian transit, you feel very stressful. Nervous system is like this, and hard to sit down. Can create really sleep disorders. Sleep patterns become strange. And all this. And this is the causative factor for the anxiety, the free-floating stress, and it's because the vibratory rate is changing. And depending on your level of illusion, can then lead straight to the core of that chakra, i.e. Kundalini. And that is clearly, from a physiological way of looking at life, the causative factor for evolution. When that's the case, then I guess you should be prepared for it, or people that do go through Kundalini awakenings, and a variety of symptoms are produced, they're all archetypes. Because when Kundalini is released, its initial role or intent, number one, to heal any area in the body that needs healing. This sometimes can be drastic and extreme. For example, like you've all heard the story of teaching all my meditation classes up in Seattle, and one of the women that came there one time came in with these Coke bottle glasses, like these real thick glasses, brown eyes. So they started teaching the Yogananda technique, and apparently her soul had past life familiarity with it, because within 10 minutes of practicing, she was just gouging at her eyes and writhing in pain, and of course this was a full-blown, instantaneous awakening of Kundalini, which is very rare, a full-blown awakening. Normally it's metered out in order to adjust your electrical system to handle the higher current. But she had a full-blown awakening, and so of course Kundalini went immediately to her eye cells, and the intent was to fix her vision. And that's exactly what happened. Within 2 weeks, she went from these Coke bottle glasses to 20/20 vision, and her eyes went from brown to blue.
But meanwhile, she continued to have pain.
So that's the drastic example. Other classical symptoms, various areas in the body becoming very cold or hot with no apparent reason or cause. Sometimes this can cause transitory or temporary paralysis in various areas of the body. Sometimes certain areas of the body will go absolutely numb. At other times it will go into the nuclear structure, the body nucleus, the cells. Wherever toxin is found, it will force it out of the body. This will normally report itself as transitory, relatively severe skin problems. It can create a real, for some, a paralysis and then peristaltic action of the colon and the intestine. The paralysis there, which can then, of course, lead to relatively severe elimination problems. It can create real strange effects in your optic nerves. Sorry. You start seeing into other realities. In fact, when it's fully developed, and this is just the absolute truth, someday you all know this truth. When it's fully activated, it produces a consciousness. There's a saying in Sanskrit, center everywhere, circumference nowhere. And it's just what it means. In this state of consciousness, it's called a spherical consciousness, in which your sight is simultaneous. And at the same moment, and everything that you perceive changes into an inner luminosity that has a gray-blue sheen to it. In its most advanced state. This is when you can know for yourself, believe me, beyond any book, any teacher, anybody's words, you can know for yourself the fundamental truth of this creation. Because in that state of consciousness, it's like consciousness is virtually, it's really hard to find the words, but you've heard the word in Buddhism, for example, the uncreated created. And for so many people who are stuck in their stupid left brain, this is a paradox. It cancels itself out. Meaningless world. Out of nothing came one. And the mind's going, huh? The sound of one hand clapping. Remember this one? In any case, what you will finally perceive as yourself. And this means, by the way, your sense of identity is intact. Your sense of self is intact when you're in this ultimate state. And what that state is, remembering spherical consciousness, you're virtually on... ¿Cómo se dice? This is where English gets weird. It's like if I made a picture, this is black and this is white, and there's a line, yeah? Black, white. Where you are in this state is you're on this line. And what the white will correlate to is the uncreated. And when you stand on this line, this is the actual point of creation. The actual point. And what you then know the nature of vibration. Vibration. Positive factor for the appearance of form. But what you're experiencing is, well, I'll leave it to you. So, there's no words. But believe me, when you are in this place, you know once and for all, it will never be lost. The nature of creation. It's sort of like if you remember the life of Christ, and if you remember his birth chart, he has Neptune in Scorpio with the South Node in the 11th house. Look what we're describing. Like in his terminology to fit his culture. This is what the words is what they mean, i.e. mystical marriage. This is what this means, this line. So,
Do you have to be a certain evolutionary state to feel that?
yes. Because to arrive at that, the ability to even have that consciousness, you have to go through a series of adjustments in your own body/electrical field. Again, if I put 10 watts through a 5-watt bulb, boom. Evolution, Kundalini awakening, is a progressive evolution of your electrical circuitry to where you can handle ever more current, because it's like a current. It's like putting a finger in a wall socket. It's just what it's like. And you have to allow your system to adjust as you evolve. That's why it's called evolution. So you have to reach a state of being prepared. And that's why in this country or in some other countries, when, especially when all this new age shit took off and people now selling like, come and take a Kundalini yoga workshop or learn fire breathing. I mean, so many people that want to this shit are not prepared. They're going too far, too fast. And you can actually create great psychological damage when you do not allow the natural sequence to unfold. Real damage, like going insane.
Jeff, can it be, in a smaller version of that, be creativity? When you created something that you know is just that essence you just know it's right? Is there anything?
I'm not getting what you mean. Try again.
Beyond this huge experience that you're talking about, can we have smaller?
Yeah, it's progressive. It's progressive.
Such as when you've created something that you know is representing what you're talking about.
Yes, the initial state is the initial goal to arrive at that place. To allow yourself to remember by birthright the perception to the original day that allows for this.
And we have little ones, like...
It's progressive.
Or something.
And then finally, through preparation, you can finally perceive, really perceive, see, a thing called third eye. This is what Christ did call mystical marriage. And once you actually perceive this in totality, you will see in the very middle of this thing a white star, all people will see it. It is archetypical. And this in Sanskrit is called Amrita, which in Aramaic was the mystical marriage. And once you actually perceive that white star, listen carefully, this by birthright, once it's perceived, is allowed to merge. It's automatic. It occurs of itself. There is no breath in the body. The consciousness is free from law of cause and effect. And at that point, it's simply a progression to this ultimate oneness. And when you have this, you then know, really know, what is called God. And
Jacqueline, I was doing the Agni meditation that you taught us last time, and like nothing that I'd ever experienced, the vibration started in my hands and then worked its way through my whole body. I mean, it was just the most intense experience I had ever had meditating. And I mean, it scared me to the right. I was like, okay, I had to open my eyes and be like, you know, but I mean, it was crazy. It was like I had never, but I now when explaining this, it's like it makes sense. It was like my body was releasing and then making room for this new kind of.
right. Well, see, even before you see this thing, I'll just show you the archetypical so you guys will know it, and you know the difference between truth and bullshit. It's really simple stuff. It's when you first begin meditation and you're doing a formal meditation like Hong So. I mean, it takes to create a capacity in yourself to consistently concentrate. The secret is concentration on the Hong So in this example. Even that is a struggle. For many people, it can be 20 years, if not lifetimes, because the mind wants to wander. And when you totally get to the point where you can concentrate on whatever the method is that you're using, and you're totally in alignment with this is when the breath of itself will progressively begin to shallow. You're not even. So it's bypassing the egocentric fear of losing control, meaning the ego is not noticing. The concentration. You don't concentrate on the inhale-exhale, you concentrate on the method, technique. Once this becomes relatively solidified, your first experience, the first one, where you will inwardly begin to perceive your consciousness in the center of purple amethyst type light. It is initially swirling, and you're in the center of it. And believe me, that experience of itself is wondrous. You know that. It becomes wondrous. You know, it's like, wow. So this will go on depending on the person's, who they are as an individual, for who knows how long. But this will finally evolve. And step in the evolution is that this color will give way to a swirling universe. It's like looking at a swirling galaxy. And these colors are now blue, yellow, white. And this will continue for a time. And progressively over time, this galaxy will begin to solidify. And progressively it solidifies as what people call third eye. The outer layer will be yellow against a field of black. Yellow is the symbol and color of the soul. And the center is blue. And that is, of course, the color of God. And right within this is the Amrita. And so this is the progressive evolution. And then as this solidifies, and this becomes a permanent feature. Because when your third eye is a permanent feature, it is always there. You don't look for it, it's always there. And so then you become the recipient, meaning you unite with this white star. And at that point, it's simply a matter of progressive expansion. And you're simply the recipient of various teachings, knowledge, wisdom. They reflect the intrinsic truth of the manifested creation. See, along the way there's different universes you evolve through. There are 7 universes in total, 3 of which are time-space-based / cause and effect. There are 3 universes that have nothing to do with time. There's no way to explain that. And 1 universe that's transitory, that's between the 2. For example, the highest evolution, the time-space universe, this is a state of consciousness in which when you evolve to it, you have exactly the same power and capacity as God itself, when you can literally, with will, create or destroy anything in these universes. Why? Because you've now learned the law of vibration. And so on. So it's just a progressive expansion. So.
As one is progressing through these universes, does one ever go back or fall back? Or is
No, but what the interesting deal is when you come back into human form. Take the case of Christ, for example, or Yogananda, or Buddha. I mean, these souls had to be born. Born as Yogananda, born as Jesus, born as Lhasa. And the mind fuck is that even though these souls have been, God realized, fully liberated for who knows how long, by coming in each life as a baby, by the sheer fact of being in human form, they have to remember. Think about that. No different than when a soul is born and it has to learn everything all over again. Like it already knew how to eat, it already knew how to change its clothes, but it's all relearned. No different with a God-realized soul. That's the mind fuck.
another reason to live longer?
What would be some of the signatures of the aspects of Uranus hitting other planets that would show some of the Kundalini movement?
What we come in here with?
Is there any way to get this man to turn off his machine?
They run them every Monday for about 15 minutes. The second engine, they've got to do it.
Let's take right. Ask that like that. Now, one thing too just to review one little piece of that, when you go into this evolutionary process and you first begin to perceive this amethyst purple sphere that you're within, right at that moment, the molecular density of your body will shift, which means the body starts to get lighter. And this is preliminary to when the body naturally lifts off the surface. And the normal experience through perception is you will perceive the external environment as somehow being in an earthquake scenario. It will literally seem like an earthquake. And most people that go through this will even think via perception that, uh-oh, an earthquake is happening. And of course, many will open their eyes only to discover that, in fact, the earth is just fine. And it's an inner earthquake that's happening. And that's this reflection of the molecular density of the body cells, i.e. electrical current shifts are underway. I don't know how many of you people know a great historical personage named St. John of the Cross. But they literally had to keep him inside a building because they couldn't keep his body on the surface. It's a true story. So, any questions on those states? Donna?
Once you achieve a state like that, every time you meditate, must you go through long periods to get back there, or will you find yourself being there right away?
Yeah, it becomes relatively instant at will. You have a question?
Yeah, what are the signatures that of the Uranus transiting affecting the planets that you can see that is affecting Kundalini movement?
I don't understand the question.
I'm having problems. It's not you. I cannot
Thank you.
actually be very clear. But what I want to find out is what would be what planets would Uranus to transit be affecting that would reflect the Kundalini movement?
Well, Pluto
Uranus
can also have a link to Uranus. Jupiter. 8th house cusp. Something being ignited through the archetype of Scorpio. And the like.
What about Saturn? In the Kundalini gland, isn't it Uranus? The Uranus archetype, doesn't that break up the outer layer of Saturn?
That's the chakra. That's the chakra. So the actual gland is Pluto Jupiter. Pluto Jupiter. Pluto Jupiter.
This is kind of a little off, but what's been your experience in terms of diet and food and things like that relative to this?
The answer is straightforward. It's the answer any really realized soul will give you. Whatever your body is naturally drawn to eat is what you eat. Period. All this crap around specialized diets and this and that. Please.
What do you do with, what do you do if some of the symptoms are rather severe or something like that? Do you do anything about it? Do you just have to ride it out, so to speak? Or
You can't go have it treated at a doctor. No. This won't work.
Do you like acupuncture?
You just have to interpret why it's happening and let it work its way through. Understanding that a positive thing is happening even when the body is feeling uncomfortable. Like people in this country, you just cut their skin and they run into the doctor. It's like everything's an emergency here. It's true.
In your Uranus book, you give a little description of like vitamin D and pancreatic acid and that type of thing. Is that for most? Is that assisting for most Uranus transits? You kind of like assisting the nervous system?
No, that was a specific treatment relative to the hypothalamus, which is ruled by Uranus. And you have to see the issue there is that the hypothalamus emits what are called chemical messages. They impact on the primary brain, which are regulating the instinctual functioning of the body. The hypothalamus' ability to function correctly is dependent on the overall nature of the electrical condition in the brain. And remembering that the nature of thought of itself is electrical. The very nature of thought is electrical. You can now imagine if somebody's going through because the word I like with Uranus is the word quickening, to quicken. When Uranus is active, everything is quickening. And this also includes the nature of one's thought, as it's now reflected in the nervous system. Not only the central nervous system, but the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous systems, each side of spine, which are directly connected to hypothalamus. So all too often what happens is that the existing nature of the hypothalamus relative to the Uranus transit becomes overwhelmed or bombarded by this increase of electrical current in body. And in many cases, when it's overwhelmed, then the chemical message that it's emitting are based on the fact that it's being overwhelmed. So that then how the primary brain interprets these messages gets all fucked up. And that's when the body starts going haywire. And that's where we came up with that specific combination of remedies, because it starts, of course, with the Chinese herb for tea, which is to treat the brain. And when you put that in conjunction, because in these scenarios, the circulatory system will also get fucked up. The arteries, capillary, and veins tend to get compressed while they're overwhelmed. So part of the scenario is 200 milligrams of niacin with the 14. The niacin will forcefully open artery, capillary, vein, and also allow one of its most critical functions is metabolism at a cellular level. This is why niacin is so wonderful. And that is then taken in conjunction, because in these scenarios, i.e. an increase of electrical current, interpreted by primary brain, this will induce a buildup of lactate acid into the system. And the lactate acid, which is specific to the red blood cells, will then create muscular inflammations or crampings in various areas of the system, but specifically lower back, mid-back, medulla, which, guess what, that's where hypothalamus is. And then we start creating various muscular clampings, particularly in the adrenal area. Then you're creating disruptions because of the muscles clamping down. Disruptions in the natural balances of progesterone, estrogen in the female, the male sexual hormones in the male, and in both cases, the levels of adrenaline and cortisol. And this is why in those activated transits, the persons can get, it's almost impossible to predict the energy movement. The person's going from states of hyperactivity, almost like an excessive coffee rush, and all of a sudden the cortisol reacts and there's a sudden loss of energy, feeling like a stupid yo-yo back and forth, moments of dominant sexual energy, then all of a sudden it's gone, no predictability, and back and forth we swing. So now the entire adrenal area is out of whack. The adrenals become exhausted. And in the female, this then has secondary effect in the ovary and the womb, and so on. So the next step is to add pantothenic acid to this combination, because this will dissolve the excessive buildup of the lactate acid. And the correct dose there will be around 500 milligram a day. And then lastly, the quality complex B. Because in this scenario, the sheathing on the nerves, like a gift wrap on a package, will become torn apart. And that's when you literally feel like a live wire. If somebody's to touch you, you jump. Unexpected sound, boom, coming out of our skin. That's when the sheathing's gone. So the complex B will restore the sheathing and also cool down the nervous system. That's how you typical classic remedies for Uranian transit. So wherever it is. 200.
Just when I take niacin, I get really red and itchy.
That's classic. And the way that you need to interpret that, if you had if your circulation was correct, you could take that 200 milligram and nothing would happen.
So we're to take we're to forget about the no flush kind. So there's a flush, there's a regular, and there's a no flush.
I'm saying that if you're experiencing the flush, this is a way of creating feedback to yourself that the circulation's screwy.
But in health food stores, they have what's called no flush niacin.
I don't believe that to be real niacin, man.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's got to be different.
On the quality B complex, because each B complex can have they usually have a balance of the B's. It's either 25, 50, 75, of each of like B1, B2. So what milligrams of those do you?
I just go to the health food store, find a brand called Sheath. It says B complex. I don't care about what's on the back.
Which brand is it?
Sheath. SCHIFF. Schiff.
I thought you meant sheath, like the sheathing of the I've seen sometimes in like a sleep state or whatever, like a white light or like a round white light like drops into my third eye and spins around, or it's like a gold light that shoots in and then I wake up with a headache or something. What is that in terms of?
That's just different astral vibrations and colors. So, the Uranus transit has its own natural cycle. Comes to the first square to itself at 21. Comes to opposition between 38 and 42. Comes to another square to itself at around 70, 72.
It must be around 64.
64, you're right. And then finally it has a return at 84. And these, of course, correlate with just that, the Uranian archetype, what typically experienced in all of our consciousness, key points in our transitions in our life. Now, on a collective level, ever since Uranus went to Aquarius, actually started when it was in Capricorn, the words that George Bush came up with was a new world order. Remembering that natally Bush, believe it or not, had 11th house Pluto. And so does Clinton, by the way. And that's just what's going on. Just we have an absolute realignment. There's a revolution going on and how the worlds are aligned. The nations are aligned. The incredible revolution going on in economic policies as a result. Whole groupings of nations manifesting as trading blocs. The issue of alliances like NATO, UN, becoming ever more dominant. And of course, given the fact that things operate through polarity, remembering that now we have South Node transiting Aquarius, North Node Leo, and of course the U.S. has North Node Leo. Relative to existing context, you now see why the United States is the only remaining power with respect to the one nation. And everything's revolving around the United States now. So you can see symbolically how this has come to pass. What this will lead to, within 200 years, years, is the prevailing, the dominant political, economic structure for all countries, which will be increasingly socialism with democracy and capitalism thrown in. That's where we're going. For example, a country on Earth that would reflect where the world is going to go as a world. Countries that will symbolize that. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, so on.
How would that correlate with what you're talking yesterday about all the stuff that's going to happen under natural law? With all the cataclysms and things that have been happening?
This will be coming out of necessity.
How would that correlate to this shift?
Because the extinction of the human person is not at hand. There's going to be something left and people will have to get organized. Even in the worst, if the worst case scenarios don't happen, this will be the movement on the planet anyway. It's the only way it'll be able to come to pass. You put this in the context of increasing amounts of people on the planet, dwindling resource. The whole issue of Aquarius and moving towards Aquarius age is social equitability. And thus the minimization of hierarchies and superiors and inferiors and who's wealthy and who isn't. It all become like a median point. So, any questions on this stuff? So yet again, we're perfectly clear. For those that are going through the Uranian transit, which seems to be the majority of you, how many could recognize in various ways the various symptoms of the transit? How many couldn't? Also, now we see it. And how we're doing, yeah.
I have a question on transiting. It doesn't specifically have to be Uranus, but the house cusp, not an angle, but one of the intermediate house cusps. You know, when an outer planet crosses that cusp, it's going to be in that house maybe for, many years. Is there an initial intensity?
Yes. It's the same thing as a Pluto transit. It's 5 degrees before, 5 degrees after.
But at 5 degrees after the house cusp, it's still in that house. So it's going to be carrying that archetype.
That just means that the reality that was created via the change when the transit was active now becomes solidified. It's a feature of your ongoing reality. Okay. Let's move into ever understood Neptune. I mean, if it was understandable, we wouldn't call it Neptune. Huh?
I hate this transit. I love it. I must have more resistance. She says, I love it, and I said, I must have more resistance.
Okay, when Neptune is active through transit, its intent is to dissolve. It's a dissolving action. Dissolve anything in your existing reality that is no longer relevant or conducive to where your soul is trying to go. There are many ways for something to be dissolved. For example, the classic experience of Neptune, disillusionment. Now think for a moment what that actually means. It means that before the moment in which we are starting to become disillusioned. We have believed in something, whatever that may be, to the point where we have made it actual reality. So what is the teaching of Neptune? If in fact that which you are considering to be reality, constituting some core or ultimate meaning in your life, has in fact no actual reality other than what you projected into it, then dissolution. That which you have created as your meaning by way of projection, considered to be reality, some sort of circumstance or development will manifest. It is now going to show you the actual reality of what you have considered to be reality. This is called disillusioning, the intent of which is to align with actual reality. The psychological, emotional experience of disillusionment can be one of the most devastating experiences any of us can have. How many have not experienced disillusionment in your life? You haven't? And how many found that disillusionment to be a nice experience? It's soul-crushing. Like all the wind goes out of the sails. And induces a state of absolute meaninglessness, wherein somehow all the normal guideposts that you utilize to negotiate your life don't work. It's the ultimate existential despair, sorrow, grief, futility, pointlessness. This is where the possibility of suicide exists. Why? For any human person to conduct himself on the surface of this planet, they have to have some sense of meaning and purpose. And when this is dissolved through disillusionment, there is yet, at that point, no real reason to live. So, that's one way Neptune operates. Another way, when it's active, is to receive, apparently, of what appears to be, from the conscious mind's point of view, inspirations, revelations, realizations from, in quotes, on high, that have suddenly seem to appear of their own volition. A light going on in the dark room. And these can, of course, be very positive things for any of us. So it has this application. Can also have an application it's a neat way to explain it. See, the thing when something's being dissolved with Neptune, whatever is being dissolved will not be immediately replaced by anything. And this is why the sense of despair, angst and the rest of it, can become so deep. There seems to be no other place to go, nothing else to think, nothing else to feel, absolute futility. This is actually one of the tests, so to speak, from God. What God teaches us in these times I guess the way you need to look at this is that so many of us on the surface get involved with so much external shit that just constitutes our life. Normal shit. The TV program, all of it. When these major disillusionings occur, I mean, most people, all the things that constituted their normal life, going here at 5 o'clock, watching the news at that hour, going to see this person, none of it matters. It's all gone. This is God's way of trying to have the soul remember what in fact will constitute meaning. In other words, to stop looking outward and to look deeply inward. That ultimately is the reason. So, when you deal with a client, for example, who's going through this, a way that you can help a client understand this point, because it will occur. And this is an extension of what I would call God's grace. In these moments of absolute existential despair, if you can suggest to the client, and or maybe it's your own case, don't resist any temptation to, sort of like when a person goes through a horrible relationship ending and they're sitting there all alone and they want to be with somebody, and so you create that rebound scenario. And you rush out and you try to fill up this great aloneness with somebody else. And of course, this is why the rebounds never work, or in most cases they don't. But in a real similar way with this angst and the rest going on, a lot of times a person does try to, but that evaporates about as quickly as they do it anyway. So what God is teaching here is to inwardly allow God to reveal the next few steps. Pretty soon there will be one awareness or a thought, impulse, something manifesting in your brain, something that will appear of its own volition, that if you take action on, will begin to reconstruct your life in such a way that new impulse/seat will become that which your sense of meaning is built around. It's sort of like saying, a story I used to use to illustrate this process. And it's a funny little story. It's a story of, imagine a bunch of yuppies, and they get on this little sailboat, and it's sunny out when they get on the boat. And of course they bring the case of martinis. And they set off into the ocean. And it's this nice sunny day. And of course the wind's in the sails so they can control the boat. But suddenly, apparently out of nowhere, instant fog, wind stops, compass breaks. Here they are. What will be the typical reaction? Well, from the yuppie point of view, they would either do that or they would attempt to somehow manipulate the boat because they're afraid, they're lost, they don't know where they're going, they're desperate. And of course there would be no real way to manipulate the boat. The only way that the boat could be naturally manipulated is by allowing the boat to follow its own natural current in the ocean, which will inevitably take it back to shore. So you see the teaching there. And that's just how we're meant to operate in Neptune transit when this stuff is happening. Obviously what we're referring to is the loss of egocentric control. So the there's clearly a deeper teaching behind this. You know, a great way to illustrate it also is that this man was full of his aware of the betrayal for South. The parables. Good fact to see them. Now look how this is, isn't it? Uptune. At the end of the world. Nice uptune. Now to also have these applications by way of visualization, inspiration, on high, and when upon soul, change life, time frame of one's which all divine intention of this application. Neptune, I see. And given trying to abuse Pisces moon. The way I said childhood is Angel Mary showed up within me. Your mother, she said, of God's. Manifest and create a time frame. Solution. Another side of any time for some, in which such seem progressively to have meaning. Distant from that. But meaning had been created. Again, which is being experienced in progressive, is not immediately given knowledge or with meaning. They have another. Apply a client for yourself. Just patient. Like the lamp. Relatively speaking, direct that will constitutes meaning will be revealed. Simply spontaneously occur, apparently of its own volition in your awareness. Other applications turn disturbances for psychological stability, for some of neurosis, of the immune system, and as physical problems. Other manifest suddenly of life, for whatever some reason, become extreme states of being. Rather than play it with an acceleration of their spiritual development. What they've been preparing for is at hand. Time frame in which suddenly they find themselves out of their body, astral projecting. Just a developing talents that are latent, telepathy, etc.
What was the last word?
Clairvoyancy, telepathy can be a time frame in which the nature has some direct bearing or meaning on the very nature of one's life manifest. Well, it's a common application for all of us. A typical physical reaction turns out extreme. Now, very different as exhaustion.
It was not like a happy herb when he did. For soul exhaustion, is a good way to remedy that or help that out is to connect from
And to let yourself sleep. Typically, that means when that kind of exhaustion is reached, it means other people's linked their lives into it. And that's the incredible exhaustion. It's not just the tiredness of this life. It's the tiredness of into a at the same time.
Was there a feeling of despair with it?
Yes, sorrow. Interesting is that now has begun its transit through Aquarius. And if we remember that it's only is at 8 degrees. Now we've had the Uranus come up upon it. Now we have Neptune approaching its own south node.
Could you repeat that, please? What you just said.
Neptune's coming up to its own south node.
Yeah, in the zodiac?
Well, in each of your individual charts, you just locate the house of south node of Neptune. On a collective level, issue. Meaning the vibration of Aquarius typically applies to all of us. If you allow anything symbolically, you just get blown away in this shit because of, number one, you know that from a medical point of view, Neptune has an application to immune systems. You know that Uranus has an application to atmospheres. Relative to existing context, you can now see via the breakdown of the atmosphere. They break down the intrinsic immune system, so to speak, of the atmosphere. Whose primary function is to shield excessive radiation and all that, and to have a natural distribution of heat and cold. This natural structure is now being severely degraded. The immune system of the atmosphere is being degraded. What do you think the extension is to the life forms, also with immune systems, on the surface of the planet? Well, as an example, when you look in the sky and you see clouds, clouds are Neptune. From a social political point of view, what you now see underway on the planet, a way of realignment of political orders, economic systems, groupings of people, what is their definition politically, all is now this revolution, in which the progressive thrust and intent all over the planet is to create healthy forms of socialism that still have capitalistic models within essential, but there's an evolution to create motivation for most people. If a person has some motivation to think they can get ahead of someone else within a healthy socialism which distributes resource fairly. This is what will be the prevailing model ultimately. This is where everything's being realigned. And as I wrote way back in the 80s, the political system that attempts to become, or is, authoritarian, totalitarian, communistic. People rebel against it. I wrote that way back in the 80s, and it's all come true. There's only, if I remember right, there's only a couple of countries with communism. North Korea. And even Cuba is now moving into socialism. So that's even changing. And so I think there's in reality only one country left now that is literally communistic. And that it would be North Korea.
What, China?
No, they've allowed democracy, not democracy politically, capitalism within a socialism.
It's not really capitalism.
in their way of looking at it. Nothing. They reflect pulse in their way. That's the point.
Why do you think it's North Korea that's left? Is there any reason?
It's just isolation. You know, I mean, I would ask you a question. How long do you think North Korea will be able to sustain itself that way? At maximum 20 years.
People are starving over
Pretty soon, in the context of many of your lifetimes, I'll make the prediction now there will be no more North Korea as it's known currently. That's already underway, actually. So, question this Neptune.
5 degrees before, 5 degrees. Oh, and your sailboat story?
Sailboat. I was on that boat, no.
Well, I think the early baby boomers did martinis. But I think there's probably another drink that is would be more up to date or current.
Up to date.
There's like a wine spritzer. I don't know what is.
For the Pluto and Virgo people?
I don't know. You know, I don't think anybody does martinis anymore. I quit 3 years ago.
Yeah, martini bedtime
Neptune. Oh my.
I guess they're now doing it's an Italian sparkling wine. Very tempting.
Let's make break.
Should we turn them in as we go?
Yes. And you just do it one at a time and wait for it to come back.
Oh, one at a time?
Yeah. You wait for actions to come back. Generally speaking, it takes the general student maybe the first 3 to 4 assignments to really get used to what you're looking for. So I like it. Wait for it to come back. Roughly around the 3rd or 4th one, the average student's got it. And it just becomes like clockwork. Yeah, general. So, now we've come to a place where for the remainder of our time today and tomorrow, which will culminate tomorrow at noon, you can ask whatever about the school, anything we've talked about. This is now a time of review and go into any of the dynamics or points that you wish. Today I will stay with you till about noon. I'll have Ellie take over. I have to tend to some inner things. And I'll show up here again in the morning. So anything you want to cover with me from now that's noon, fine.
Regarding the transit of planets that are retrograde, like Neptune and Pluto and Uranus, actually all the planets that go retrograde, what would be the difference of the effect of a retrograde transit versus a direct transit?
When it goes retrograde again, remember that energy withdraws. It internalizes. So before the thing goes retrograde, there's already been an initial direct motion. That's already set something in motion. And when it goes retrograde, this gives us kind of a timeout to reflect on what that initial burst or new movement, new direction, new something has been occurring. And this now gives us a chance to reflect on that, to adjust. It's a time of adjustment. And this goes on within. And so by the time the thing goes direct again, you have more of an awareness of now that you apply to that new something that's been set in motion. I mean, to me, that's God's grace, because you have like a miniature timeout. That's what I need right now. No, what else would you...
I just remember you mentioning in the books about the fundamental inherent difference between if you're in a female body or a male body.
Mm-hmm.
Say a little bit about that.
Should be self-evident. When you're in a when you're in a female form, the physiology of the body is different, starting with the brain. For example, when a woman listens to somebody, they listen with both sides of their brain. When a man listens to something, they hear it only, to most men, through the left brain. Now look at what this means. You see? And that's why typically when a man and a woman go through some sort of intense discussion, let's say, something's being confronted. And typically the man wants to keep the eye on the ball. This is what we're talking about. But the woman's got this circle thing happening. So she wants to bring in this and that and this contributes, and the man's going, no, it's right there. Typical deal, just based on how we're listening / perception. So, it's just right on down the line.
And if your last life was a gender, if you just switched from last life, because I feel I just switched enough that, and I get very confused, like in relationships, like what my role, like who I am. I really get confused.
Well, simply choose a partner who's doing the same thing. There won't be any confusion. You can alternate the roles at will.
They had that one, these Eckankar?
Yeah.
They said something about, it was actually a woman I met from the organization who actually was really cool. And she was just very bright and like really seemed to advance. But she had chosen to be in this organization, and she was like kind of high up in the organization. She did a lot of stuff and taught all these classes. And then I asked her, why can't you be like, because I always like to ask the provocative question, is why can't you be like the head? She was, because women can't handle the spiritual, like they don't have the magnetic structure, the structure to handle all the impulse from God.
Women have based on intrinsic physiology, have much more of an intrinsic capacity to unite or expand, so to speak, than a man. Why? Because women aren't linear. Women in general are multilinear, multidimensional.
And with the, because we talked a lot about like past lives and like, sisters sleeping with brothers and all that incest, all that kind of stuff. And like, for example, if a sister sleeps with a brother, is that a violation of natural law?
Only when the sexuality is enforced.
Only
When one of the siblings is forcing.
Oh, okay. And the same thing with if a father sleeps with a daughter or something like that?
If it's a natural consensual event, it's not incest.
But down the line with that kind of stuff.
Right. In fact, I had a client that had sex with her brother and her father. In reality, she enjoyed it. It wasn't forced. But then because she was being brought up in Catholic schools, she felt completely guilty for the sheer fact of enjoying. And that fact itself made her repress the events for many years, which caused her to become multi-personality. Multi-personality is an archetype, is Libra. Good enough. Like in this woman's case, that client's case, she had Mars and Gemini in the 7th house, squaring Saturn in the 9th, on the South Node, with the Virgo Moon, Saturn, Moon, and Virgo, and the Mars is making square to North Node in Pisces. So in essence, she had an operational T-square, Mars, Gemini, in the 7th. So you see the sexual signature between brother-father, which is now repressed Saturn, based on beliefs. Oh, I'm not supposed to enjoy this. My religion tells me so. Ninth house. And this caused multi-personality. She's actually one of the clients in the homework. So you can remember this little clue.
Why would some babies be like why would then, if that was unnatural for that to happen, like if they had a child, how come a lot of them are deformed? How come a lot of them are deformed?
Who's deformed?
That's what at least that's what I've heard, that when like both siblings have children, a lot of the times they're deformed or something like that. If that's in accordance with natural law, why would that happen?
Well, what happens in natural law is that you have to remember that going back in actual natural law, there's no nuclear family. Children didn't even know who the actual mother, or the mother didn't know who the actual child were. Everything was raised communally. Since there was then no direct knowledge, oh, this is my baby, and everything is raised communally, what this means in natural law is that teenagers, when you hit puberty, were having sexuality together. And sometimes that was brother-sister. And every once in a while there would be a mutation when that would occur. But the impulse is what I'm defining. And when you bring this up through time, and you put this overlay of nuclear family, fraternity, and all this business, that's why brothers and sisters have this natural impulse going all the way back to natural law. That because now they're confined in the context of a nuclear family, that creates the real possibility that when they do have sex and they do conceive, of what this... Okay.
I've noticed in a lot of the charts that we do, we're talking about being comfortable with role switching with a mate and balancing the male-female within us. If that's a soul urge, is there a certain evolutionary area or level that starts to...
Yes. It begins in the first stage, individuated. Becomes very strong in the second stage. And it becomes a feature by the third stage. What else?
Back to what you're talking about personality disorders, are there any other like specific signatures to look for as far as anything more than like synthesized, 7th house or Libra? Or I mean, is there, besides just conversations with the client, I mean, is there any other like specific signatures that you can see that there's possibly going to be a personality disorder?
Sure. A lot of times when Uranus is in stressful aspects to personal planets, particularly the moon. So too with Neptune in stressful relationships with personal planets, particularly the moon or the sun, i.e. the integration factor. For example, commonly, not always, commonly, when you have Pluto in opposition Mars, it'll typically correlate with what's called a split personality. As an example, many people who have moon opposed Uranus or conjunction with Uranus have fractured personalities. There are variations, yes.
Is the tape one way of trying to, I mean, is there any other things besides the tape that can help integrate this or heal this wounded fracturing that...
Well, the first issue is for the person to become aware of what the cause has been for the condition, why they've had a need to create that for themselves. Healing of this nature cannot take place, really, until the person understands and accepts their own responsibility in the creation of whatever the condition is. Only then can integration and healing begin. Because in the end there's no victims. And that's a really tough thing, because obviously for many of us to go through traumatic situations, particularly from a point of view of a life in which there's no apparent cause, meaning than something coming over from another time. It's easy for most of us to feel victimized. Why did this happen to me? Versus asking the question, what in me needed to create this for myself? That takes an act of courage. A real act of courage.
And so just like through meditation, by asking